Lock in your gains and reset. Welcome back. In this episode, we are going to answer the question, how do I not lose the money that I've made? So put on your seatbelt. I'm going to blow you away with one of my favorite strategies called lock in and reset. So my name's Doug Andrew. I've been a financial strategist and retirement planning specialist for more than 45 years. And one of my favorite strategies is pretty profound when I teach it to audiences throughout the country, on my radio show, in my various books that I've authored. And it's how to make money, but any year you make money, you want to protect that money so you never lose the money you made in previous years. Most financial advisors don't know how to do this. And so this is called lock in and reset, and it answers the question, how do I not lose the money that I've already made in a previous year or previous years? Now, Warren Buffett has two rules of investing. Don't lose money, and don't forget rule number one. Now, maybe easier said than done, but let me show you why I'm so passionate about this particular concept. One of my favorite vehicles is what I call the laser fund. In fact, one of my books is titled The Laser Fund. And this is an indexed universal life insurance contract where I have averaged a little over 10% net rate of return cash on cash. And some people hear that. Some advisors hear that and go, no way, I've never seen one of them do that. If you understand that money inside of an insurance contract is the only financial instrument, vehicle that allows you to accumulate your money tax-free, then be able to access the money tax-free, and when you die it blossoms in value, it increases and transfers income tax-free. Nothing else does that in the Internal Revenue Code in the United States. And so this idea was first a brainchild of E.F. Hutton. They weren't in an insurance company, they were a brokerage firm. And so back in 1980 is when they came out with the idea, and it's called fixed universal life. This is where you just sit back and enjoy the general account portfolio rate that the insurance company is earning on their money. They put their money in AAA and AA bonds, and very little goes out in mortgages on real estate, but on skyscrapers or shopping malls, they only loan about 50% loan to value. Very little into stocks. They're very conservative. Their general account portfolio rates have been between 3.5%, 4% up to, in the 1980s, I earned between 11.75% and 15.5%. But on the average, many of these contracts will guarantee you at least 3% as a rate of return. The lowest I've ever earned is 4% in these. The highest was about 13.75% on this particular one. Then in the 1990s, variable came out. I've never owned a variable contract, and that's where you take your money and put it out into the market in like a mutual fund environment. So there's no guarantees. You can lose money. In fact, people have lost as much as 50% like in 2008. You can make as high as maybe 35%, but the average since the turn of the century up until this point, I did this in the worst 10, 12-year period since the Great Depression, 2000 to 2012. And the average was only 1.81%, so that was pretty bad. Now, indexing came out in 1997, and that's where my money is not in the market like variable. It stays safe in the insurance company. They have to pay me the guaranteed rate or the general account portfolio rate, maybe 6.5% or 5%, whatever it is at the time. But any year I want, I can opt to link my returns to an index, and they'll take the interest on my money. Let's say I have $1 million and the general account portfolio rate is 5% net. That would be 50 grand. I can tell them, you know what, you don't have to keep that 50,000 of interest on hand, buy options or do whatever, so you'll have the wherewithal to pay me whatever the market does if it goes up. But if it goes down, I forfeited my interest on my million that year, but I didn't lose my million. So what happens is zero sometimes is your hero, because in 2008, I didn't earn anything, but I didn't lose anything. Most Americans lost 40%. So the lowest is zero in this example. In this worst decade, the average was 7.84%, but I've averaged actually, since indexing came out as a strategy in 1997, 11.2%. So let me show you this lock-in and reset strategy. So you can probably tell my favorite is the indexed universal life, because I've averaged usually about 2.5% higher rates of return. In fact, over a 30-year average, these are 5 different ones that I've owned. You can see here 8.11%, 7.73, 7.42, 8.85, 8.3. Those are pretty consistent rates of return, and that's without rebalancing. In other episodes, I teach how to rebalance and diversify, and I actually move my rate of return up to over 10%. But let me show you this lock-in and reset. I want to ask you this question: which series would you prefer here? The one on the left or the one on the right? We put in $100,000, and I think this is over a 10-year period. And so you happen to hit just before the market starts to go. And so it goes up, and then all of a sudden the market comes down. This might have been 2001 to 2003. It could have been 2007 and 2008. But the market goes up and then down and then comes back up again. Do you like that one? Or would you prefer this one? Here, the market goes up, but when this one drops, maybe as much as 30 or 40%, this one doesn't drop. It keeps earning maybe 1%, maybe 0. But it just sort of holds its own. You don't lose. And then when the market turns around again, you start making money again right off the bat. Well, I hope you're choosing this one because you don't lose. Will Rogers once said people get more concerned about the return of their money instead of the return on their money when they go through the market. So this is what happens. This went down to 152,000. This was still worth 189,000. At the end of the day, this was up to 238, but this was up to 269 because we got rid of the losses. So how do you do that? This is the advantage of what is called an annual lock-in and reset strategy. So let's say you have 100,000 and it's in an indexed insurance contract, and that year the market goes up 10%. So at the end of the year you have 110,000, right? Well, let's say now an indexed universal life policy becomes new principal. It's newly protected principal. You cannot lose that gain due to market volatility. Because if the next year, if the market dropped 10%, okay, you're not back to break even. You're losing 10% if you're in the market of the 110. That's 11 grand. So if you're in the market, you're down to 99,000. You're below your original investment when you go up 10 and down 10. But when you lock in that gain, you can settle for 0, or sometimes you just say, you know what, just pay me 1%. And the trade-off is they might cap you during the up years to only 10 or 11%. So you have 111,100 versus only 99,000. Now let's say the market turns around again and goes back up 5%. So here you make 5% from this point, not down here. So if the market goes up, this is now worth 116,000. This is only worth 103,000. Hopefully you like this, because you don't lose. And many times, like our clients in 2008, when a lot of Americans were going crazy, okay? The market dropped 40%, and our clients were like, go, because it didn't matter. They weren't losing. And the first 90 days of 2009, they locked in gains of 16% after not losing a penny. They were way ahead. In fact, most Americans, it took until 2012 just to get their money back. By then, our clients had doubled their money again, a second time in that 12-year period. So that's a $12,000 difference. Let me show you what it actually does. This is February of 1999, April 2009, probably the worst 10-year period since the Great Depression. The market went up, and then 2001, 9/11, it went down, down, down. Then it went up, 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 2008, wah! This is 2007, 2008, and then it barely came back. So that's your money in the market. This is what would have happened with the money that you would have had at that time period. 100,000 would have only been worth 68,000 after 10 years. With indexing, if you were in there and you earned 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 5 of the years, you didn't make anything, but you didn't lose. You locked in that gain here, and when this went up here, you locked in that gain there, you would end up with 178,000 instead of 68,000. That's the beauty of locking in your gains and resetting. So I like this strategy because traditional financial planning, if you want a guarantee, you have very little upside. Otherwise, you have to choose the upside in the market, but there's no guarantees. I like the maximum funded tax advantaged insurance contract, which I call the laser fund in my book. And you can get a free copy of this book when you click on this video and watch it. But you get guarantees that you won't lose with an upside potential. This is where I have earned an average rate of return of 10.17% for the last 25 years. In fact, many years I've earned as high as 25%. So that's what I mean by use, lock in, and reset. This is the best way to not lose the money you've made in the past. If you want to learn more about this, if this is arousing curiosity, I have many other episodes that talk about this, and this book, The Laser Fund, talks about it in detail. If you click on this episode and you watch it, you'll have an opportunity. You can get a free copy of this. You just pay $5.95 shipping and handling, and I'll fire one out to you, and you can learn more.